The Paul Leslie Interviews.
Ladies and gentlemen, it's a pleasure to welcome legendary David Sanborn. It's a pleasure.
Thank you. Thank you. Nice to be here. So you should tell them that background noise that they hear is
This is
the band.
Yes, this is the authentic backstage experience.
Yes.
We're at the Variety Playhouse here in Atlanta.
Pulling the curtain back, ladies and gentlemen.
Who is David Sanborn?
Oh, God. I don't know how you want me to answer that. Depends on who you talk to, I guess. Talk to my ex-wife, she'll tell you one story. I don't know. I'm a musician. That's how I define myself, I guess. Human being first, then musician second.
Tell us about the influence of Hank Crawford on your life.
Hank Crawford, both Hank Crawford and there was another saxophone player named David Fathead Newman. And these guys were saxophone players with Ray Charles. Played in the Ray Charles band in the 50s, 60s, sometime into the late 60s. When I was growing up, I listened to a lot of, I grew up, I was born in 1945, so I grew up kind of like while rock and roll grew up. And kind of rock and roll sprang out of rhythm and blues. And so all these old rhythm and blues singers came out of the boogie-woogie jazz bands and would play, so a lot of the musicians were jazz musicians who played, kind of blues-style jazz, and they came out of those touring bands that toured the South and the Midwest and the Mid-South. And, the music, Ray Charles was kind of like the apex of that for me, because he combined jazz, gospel, and rhythm and blues. And in the early days of rock and roll, saxophone was the solo instrument of rock and roll. You really didn't hear very many electric guitar solos. It was mostly saxophone players. And so I was kind of steeped in that tradition, and that was the music that I heard around me. People like Fats Domino, Little Richard, and these guys both had saxophone players in their band. And Ray Charles certainly always had a saxophone player in his band. And that was that jazz, gospel, and rhythm and blues mix that was prevalent in that music that really turned me on. And when I heard the music of Ray Charles and heard these guys playing, that was kind of what I was drawn to.
Was Herb Hardesty from Fats Domino's band, was he an influence on you?
Herbert Hardesty, I forget where I heard him first. It's funny, I ran into him in Las Vegas. Because I don't know if he's, I'm not sure if he's still alive.
Yeah.
He's still living in Las Vegas?
Still is.
Yeah.
I just talked to him a while ago.
Sweet guy, man. Great player, too. Did he play with Little Richard? Or was
Yes,
it
he did.
Was it Little Richard or Fats Domino or both?
Both.
Both, right?
And a bunch of others.
Yeah, and there was another tenor saxophone player named Lee Allen, who grew, from New Orleans. And these were the guys that kind of created a style of music. There's another guy named Illinois Jaquette, another saxophone player named Arnett Cobb, a lot of Texas players. They used to call them the Texas tenors. And these guys came out of bands like Lionel Hampton's band, and they played like what they call jump music. Louis Jordan and the Timpani Five. So all of that music would kind of laid the groundwork for early rock and roll. And then Big Joe Hunter came along and sang. He was always a saxophone player in that band.
Tell us about performing with Albert King and Little Milton when you were young.
Well, when I was growing up in St. Louis, they used to have these dances right around where I grew up, and these regional bands would come through and play these dances. And two of the bands were Little Milton and Albert King. And they would play these things called teen towns. There were dances usually in VFW halls or social halls of some kind. And in the summer times, it was out by a public swimming pool. They'd set up a bandstand. Little Milton was played very regularly there. And my friend, a drummer friend of mine, and I became friendly with the keyboard player that played with Little Milton. He knew that we were musicians, and one time he said, "Why don't you bring your horn down, and I'll get you can sit in with Milton." And I was like 15 years old and terrified, but I said okay, because the pull of it was much stronger than my fear. So I got my nerve up and sat in with him, and I didn't have to play that much. I just had to play a part like doo-da, doo-da, dee-da. But I was in heaven just doing that. From that moment on, I was hooked, and they were very gracious to me, both those gentlemen. Kindly allowed me to sit in with them and do some shows. I never got paid, of course, but I wasn't doing it for the money.
You've just played with so many people. on sessions, and this is probably an impossible question, and for the listeners out there, some of them include Paul Simon, Cat Stevens, Billy Joel, Elton John. I could go on all day. But could you pick a favorite played with?
Gosh, I couldn't.
No.
I really couldn't. On a personal level, James Taylor was great to play with. I mean, he wasn't and is a real gentleman. I just have such an affinity for his music. He's just such a complete, he's like kind of the voice of America. Like Ray Charles was, but in a different way. He kind of embodies a certain kind of Americana that is just extraordinary. His level of craft in his songwriting, the scope of his musicianship is really extraordinary.
You were a member of Paul Butterfield's blues band. Did you ever
very influential?
Yeah?
Yeah.
You appeared on some of his recordings?
Yeah, quite a few. From 67 through maybe 71. All the records from 67 to 71 I was on.
He was very influential, you mentioned.
Absolutely, yeah. I mean, ironically, I went from playing with Paul Butterfield to playing with Stevie Wonder. So two of the great harmonica players in America. And I was very influenced by both of their playing. I picked up a lot of things, I think subconsciously and consciously from both of them. Just certain mannerisms that they had and the way they phrased. Butterfield had such a huge sound. Nobody had a sound like Paul Butterfield on the harmonica.
Something that might be of interest to our listeners, we've been doing this series where we've been profiling the members of David Letterman, Paul Shaffer's CBS Orchestra. Tell us about your experience with playing with Paul Shaffer.
Well, I had known Paul for years from the early days of Saturday Night Live. We met back then. We were friends over the years, and then he got the job as the musical director for the Letterman show. I was touring and doing a lot of things, and he said, "Listen, would you like to come and sit in every once in a while?" And I did, and then I sat in with him. I started to sit in on a fairly regular basis. I used to come in every Thursday. And it was great fun. It was and is great fun. I don't do it as much as I used to, but I really enjoy it. It's quite an experience. I mean, Letterman to me is extremely, he's just brilliant. He's creative and funny, and he just pushes the envelope in a way that I think no other comedian, certainly mainstream comedian, does.
The latest album is Only Everything.
Yes.
Tell everyone about this album. What do you think of it?
Well, it's kind of going back to my roots, in a way. Kind of paying homage to the Hank Crawford and David Fathead Newman and the music of Ray Charles. Even when it's not explicitly that music, it's implicitly that feeling, that sound. And the last album, Only Everything, features the organist Joey DeFrancesco. When I'm not doing this with Marcus Miller and George Duke, my main group now these days is Joey DeFrancesco on the organ and a drummer. So just the three of us go out. And that's great fun for me to play, because the other part of my playing experience growing up in St. Louis was playing with organ groups. And I have a real hot, soft, warm feeling, place in my heart for the organ, sound of the B3 organ. It's just it's so complete. And as a saxophone player, it kind of blankets you in this beautiful sound, enveloping sound.
My last question is very open-ended. Do you have any parting words of wisdom for our listeners?
Don't lose faith that music is. I know that there's a lot of chaos and turmoil going on with all the delivery systems of music, and people say, "Oh, the music is dying," and the record company's going away, and how we gotta, music is kind of fading in the background. And I feel just the opposite. I think that there are more musicians out today doing more creative things. I think there's an audience that's hungry to hear music and be moved by the music and have it be a part of their lives. And I think just it's a matter of figuring out the delivery system, how to get the music to the people and how to let them know what's happening and let the music be a part of their lives again instead of just a commodity, because it's not that. It's that, but it's more than that. It's more than just a commodity. It's something that can change your life. That creative spirit is something that's never going to die. It's never going to go away. Whether record companies go away or not is irrelevant, because they probably will. But that creative spirit, that hunger for the music, both to make it and to experience it, is universal and timeless.
Well spoken.
Thank you.
Thank you so much, Mr. Sanborn.
Thank you.
It's been a pleasure to do this interview.
Thank you very much.